Janome.
To show you a little bit more about this machine, I'm going to be walking you through this adorable circle skirt sewing project today. Are you ready to get started? For this tutorial, you will need knit fabric, pins, soft stretch light, a jersey or ballpoint needle, printed pattern, a rotary cutter, tape, an iron, and an ironing board. For this pattern, I recommend that you use a medium weight knit fabric with a content of 95% cotton, 5% lycra or spandex. Having at least 5% lycra or spandex is really going to allow your fabric to have elasticity and bounce back to its original shape without getting stretched out over time. Some other suitable fabrics that you could use for this pattern are double brush polyester, French terry, or even rayon spandex. Now, it is essential that you use a fabric with at least 50% stretch, especially on the waistband. If you're not sure what that means, take a 4-inch piece of fabric, stretch it. It should stretch to at least 6 inches. Now let's talk about how much fabric you're going to need for this project. These recommendations are based off of using a 58-inch to 60-inch wide knit fabric. For the sizes preemie through 0 to 3 month, you're going to need 1/2 yard of fabric. For 3 to 6 months through a size 4, you'll need about 1 yard of fabric. For sizes 5 through 12, you're going to need 1.5 yards of fabric. Now, make sure that you pre-wash and dry your knit fabric before you cut it and sew it. This is going to prevent your fabric from shrinking after you've sewn it. You're going to want to print off the girl's skirt pattern. You'll want to select print at actual size when you're printing it. Once it's printed, it's really important that you measure the 1 by 1 inch square. This is going to ensure that your pattern has printed to scale correctly. Now, let's begin piecing together our printed pattern. You can secure the pages together using either a glue stick or tape. The circles that have the little star cutouts are going to be aligned together. You're also going to want to align the black lines around the pattern with the next page. You can see that each sheet is clearly labeled with a number, and this is going to help you piece everything together in the correct order. I like to tape the entire top row together, and then I move on to the next row. Now that our pattern is all taped together, it's time to select our size. You can refer to the measurement chart here to find the correct size. I strongly recommend measuring both the waist and the hips of the person that you are sewing this skirt for before you select a size. This is going to ensure that you get the very best fit possible. Because this pattern will sit at the waist measurement is really the most important. If you happen to fall in between sizes, I recommend that you size up for the very best fit. Now let's cut out the pattern. You can see that each size has its very own color as well as a unique line type that's going to help you differentiate between the different sizes. I'm going to be cutting out the size 3, so I'm going to follow along the green dashed line. Make sure that you cut out both the skirt and the waistband. When you're cutting out the waistband, you can select from either the normal waistband or the yoga waistband. Now it's time to cut out your fabric. You're going to start out by placing a cutting mat on the table in front of you. Next, lay the fabric out in front of you. You'll want to fold the selvage edge of the fabric inwards. If you're working with some of the larger sizes of this pattern, you can fold the fabric so both of the selvage edges are aligned. Now you're going to place your pattern on top of your fabric. Now, the edge of your pattern should be aligned with the fold of the fabric, right here where it says fold. You want to use a few of your pins just to secure your pattern piece in place. Using either a rotary blade or a pair of scissors, now you can carefully cut around your pattern. Once you've done this, you'll want to repeat this process so that you have both a front and a back. Now it's time to cut out our waistband. It's really important that the waistband is cut with the greatest amount of stretch going across the waistband. You want to pin it in place and then you can cut around it. You should now have 3 different pieces of fabric to create your circle skirt. Now let's talk about a few sewing tips. You're going to want to use a stretch stitch. This is a stitch that's going to allow the fabric to have a small amount of stretch so that your thread doesn't break while it's being worn or stretched out. You want to use a lot of pins to line everything together, and just go slowly when you're sewing. Don't forget to use either a jersey or a ballpoint needle for the very best results when sewing with knit fabric. If you happen to have a fabric that rolls, go ahead and just spray it with some starch. That's going to stabilize the fabric a little bit and prevent it from rolling. Lay one skirt piece out on the table in front of you. Then you're going to take your second skirt and place it on top of that one. Make sure that the right sides are facing together. Next, you're going to pin along these side seams, and you want to leave this opening unpinned. Fold the waistband in half. You'll want to align your short edges together. The right sides of your fabric should be facing each other at this point. Go ahead and pin just along the short edge. You'll want to use a stretch stitch. It sort of resembles a lightning bolt. And then you're going to sew both sides of the skirt using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Sew the waistband together along the short end as well. Now when I start sewing, I like to grab both of my threads and gently pull them away from myself. This is going to prevent your machine from eating up your fabric or it getting sucked down in there. So gently pull as you start to sew, and make sure that you back stitch as well. As you're sewing, be careful that you're not stretching your knit fabric out, and be careful to remove all of your pins so that you don't end up with a broken needle. We're going to leave this waistband opening alone and skip to the other side. Again, I'm just going to gently pull on my threads, back stitch to lock it in place, and continue sewing. And then go ahead and cut your threads. I'm going to set this aside and start working on my waistband. So I'm just going to be sewing along the smallest edge and repeat the same steps as in the last step, pulling those threads away from you. Now let's go ahead and take just a few minutes to press all of your seams open. This is a really easy step to skip, but please don't, because it's going to give you a really professional look to your project, and it also helps you to avoid having any bulky seam allowances. When you're working with knit fabric, you want to be sure to use plenty of steam because this is going to really set your ironing in place. Take your waistband and press the center seam open. Now fold your waistband in half with the wrong sides facing each other. Make sure that you've lined up these raw edges together. Using the iron, you're going to quarter the waistband by folding it in half and pressing it. This is going to help it to distribute evenly when we pin it to the skirt. So I'm just using my iron just to make these little creases that will help me to distribute everything in the next step. Now go ahead and take your skirt, and you're going to be pressing the seams open. And the reason that I press all of my seams open is because it's going to help distribute the fullness. That way you don't have really bulky seams. I'm going to do the same thing with my skirt, and I want to fold it in half, lining up my seam allowances, and then I'm just going to gently press the center front and center back of the skirt, and this is going to line up with my waistband. Next, we're going to align the side seam of the skirt with the seam of the waistband. And you're going to want to align your raw edges together as well. Use a pin to secure the waistband to the skirt, and then repeat this process around the entire skirt by aligning the markings of the skirt and the waistband together. So I'm just going to start by aligning this side seam together and pinning it in place, making sure that these raw edges, you should have 3 raw edges all lined up together. I'm going to do this on the opposite side using this fold line and lining that folded line with my seam allowance. And what this does is it just helps to evenly distribute my waistband to my skirt. My waistband is smaller than my skirt, and that's because it's smaller so that it hugs the body and stays on nice and tight. But when we're putting it together, you don't want to have any puckers, so this method helps you to avoid that. Now the more pinning you do, the more evenly distributed your fabric is going to be, which is going to give you that nice professional looking finish. Once you have your 4 pins in, then it's time to add a few more. So what I like to do is gently pull on this fabric. You can see how I'm going to make everything line up. And I'll just pinch it with my fingers and place a pin in the middle. I'm going to do this on either side as well. So lining up those raw edges, gently stretching it, and placing a pin. This is just going to make sure we don't end up with any puckers and that it looks nice and neat. I always say that the inside of your clothing that you're sewing should look just as good as the outside. So that's always a goal that I'm striving for. Now if you're sewing one of the larger sizes, you may want to use more pins. If you're sewing one of the smaller sizes, you can also use less pins because your waistband will be smaller. Now it's time to sew both our waistband and skirt together. For this next step, you'll want to remove your accessory box from your machine. That way you can slip your waistband around the machine. Now you want to slide your skirt and waistband around your sewing machine. You should have your waistband facing upwards. Gently pull this under your sewing foot. As we're sewing, you're going to be using your left hand to gently pull on the fabric while you guide the fabric with your right hand. Don't forget to slow down and remove your pins as you're sewing. So let's go ahead and sew. Don't forget, we're using a stretch stitch on this. And I'm just putting light tension on this fabric just to stretch it out to the size of the waistband. You shouldn't be overly stretching this, just a little bit of tension is enough. I like to go slowly and readjust a lot. I also like to look at the back and make sure that I don't have any puckers or gathers of fabric. So just take your time as you're doing this. Now as I'm approaching the end, I'm just going to make sure that my seam allowance is still open and keep sewing. And just sew a few stitches over where you began. And I'm going to lock my stitches in place. Now before you start pressing this, do a quick check of the inside just to make sure you didn't miss any of the fabric and that you don't have any puckers. This is looking pretty good. And I'm going to trim away any excess threads. Now it's time to press the waistband seam with a hot iron. You're going to flip your skirt so that it's inside out, and you'll press your waistband facing downwards towards the skirt. I like to use a lot of steam when I'm pressing, and then I let it cool down before I move it out of place, and that's just going to make sure everything stays exactly where you want it. Now you can move on to hemming the skirt. There are 2 different methods that you can choose from for this next part. The first method is to increase the stitch length to the highest setting that the machine will allow for. You can sew a basting stitch about 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge of the hem all the way around the skirt. I'm only going to sew a small section just to demonstrate this method for you. Next, you'll carefully pull the bottom thread to slightly gather the edge of the fabric. This is going to help the hem just to curl up and into place, at which point you can pin it and sew 1/2 inch from the edge of that fabric. So I'm just barely gathering this edge, which is helping, it's already helping it to start to curl upwards. Now what you would want to do is just pin this in place. I like to fold it over about 5/8 of an inch. And then you can go along and press this edge. Sew 1/2 inch from the edge and then remove your basting stitch. I'm also going to show you another method. Now the second method is actually my preferred method, and I'm going to be using ThermoWeb Heat and Bond Soft Stretch Light. To do this, turn your skirt inside out and unroll the tape and align it with the edge of the skirt. You're going to iron it in place. You'll want to gently pull on your tape to make it line up with the curve of your skirt. Now go ahead and press it in place. Now you will have some slight puckering of the tape, but you won't be able to see this once we remove this paper liner. What this tape does is it stabilizes your hem and it gives you a really nice, pretty edge. And I think it's awesome for circle skirts because it gives that hem just a little bit more volume, which makes your circle skirt so much more fun. Next, you're going to fold the skirt over along the edge of your hem tape and just gently press it in place. This is going to give you a guide for exactly where your hem should be. Do this along the entire skirt. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and remove your hem tape. Press the entire hem with your iron. This is going to activate your heat and kind of seal this hem together. It's also just going to give you the nicest, prettiest hem ever. So I love using this when I'm working with knit fabric. Sometimes I just gently pull on the fabric to help ease in that extra fabric. Once you've pressed the entire hem, you're going to sew the skirt from the front side all the way around the hem. I usually sew it about 1/2 of an inch from the edge. As you come to the end, just slightly overlap your stitching, and you can backstitch or use a locking stitch. And you can give your skirt one final press. Now you have this adorable twirly skirt. I hope you enjoyed this quick and easy circle skirt tutorial. If you're looking for more sewing video tutorials or free patterns, be sure to subscribe to Sweet Red Poppy. If you make this skirt, be sure that you post it on Instagram and tag me so that I can see it. I'll see you next week for another fun sewing tutorial.